So I just completed this, another amazing book by Caleb Maupin, who, for those of you who aren't familiar, if you've watched this channel before, you've probably heard me mention this young man. Just to summarize, he's the author, obviously, of this book, "Divisions in the Ruling Class: Conflict Within the U.S. Elite from the Cold War to Today." He's also the founder and the leader. I don't know the official title, but founder and the leader of the Center for Political Innovation. Now you can go on YouTube and you can go to his channel, and I'll leave a link in the description to his channel. And and trust me, this is not a paid advertisement. This is just me being genuine. This is the second book of his that I've read. I read Trotsky and the Neoconservatives, and I currently have another book which I'll talk about, and I'll do a full review on this book at some point in the near future. But I'm currently reading The Battle for Soviet History and Why It Matters. Started out hot, so I'm very interested for that. And I'm also reading, unrelated to Mr. Maupin, the book Socialism Betrayed: Behind the Collapse of the Soviet Union. One thing I'll say, Socialism Betrayed, it's a great book so far. But I'm not a heavy reader. I like to audiobook, mainly because while I'm working, I can have Excel on my computer, I can be doing my thing, but I can listen. So I don't get a lot of time to sit and read. Caleb's books are very easy to read. It's a thin read, as I would call it. Social Betrayed's a little thicker read. I mean, one, he uses bigger print on the pages, so I appreciate that. But two, because his books flow like his nightly streams. So I would suggest check this book out. But I wanted to bring up this book very quickly, and like I said, I'll do a full review of this uh, in the near future. But one of the things I wanted to point out, I just want to read something that hopefully will resonate. Um, on page 77 of the book, he starts with, in bold, "The degrowthers seize power." The rise of Barack Obama marked the seizure of power by the Eastern establishment. In response to the economic crisis and the rising anti-imperialist bloc around the world, they sought to swiftly implement degrowth policies. They want to lock down the Western countries and the world and roll back wheels of history in the hopes of securing their position at the top. The managerial bourgeoisie is battling against both the lower levels of capital at home and the anti-imperialist countries around the world, both of whom reject their vision of a high-tech dark age, a tightly controlled capitalism to contain and gradually eliminate humanity. I wanted to read that. Okay, this is just basically the beginning paragraph of when the neoconservatives truly fell out of favor in the general public, and when the Eastern establishment retook control. And the reason I want to bring this up is, if you think about the Rothschilds, if you think about the Warburgs, if you think about J.P. Morgan, if you think about Obama, if you think he's a representative, he is a worker for the Eastern establishment. I would say Joe Biden is that as well, right? These are the employees of the Eastern establishment. The Eastern establishment is like the old money, the old British banking system. Some would say the old International Western Swift banking system, the EU Central Bank in Frankfurt, Brussels, the EU, London City, Wall Street, and of course the Bank of International Settlements in Brussels, Switzerland, Basel, Switzerland, excuse me. That represents the old money, the quote unquote Eastern establishment, right? The British loyalists, right? The ones who were like, oh, we don't need to fight the English. Things aren't so bad. So you can't use your old currency anymore. Just convert your whatever you got to British pounds. You'll be all right. You don't need to buy and sell that much stuff. You just need to trade in British pounds and go do everything through the English. Yeah. So they're at odds with a group that Caleb dubs the lower levels of capital. Now, don't get it twisted. Lower levels of capital, meaning this is a second power structure. Who would be in that second power structure? Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Donald Trump, I'm sure Peter Thiel, right? JD Vance. So a lot of the people who are part of the coalition that stood up against the Eastern establishment, which drew a large coalition of people who were just disgruntled and angry voters, not necessarily in conjunction with all of the policies that these people have. And the perfect example of this is how he ends the paragraph where he says that the lower levels of capital, they are at odds with they're at odds with people who don't want necessarily the well, I apologize. It's the lower levels of capital want growth, right? So they're not anti-growth. The the degrowthers, they're the ones who want, for example, the Eastern establishment degrowthers, they're the ones who push a lot of the climate change stuff in order to restrict. They use climate change as an economic and a business tactical weapon. So they try to restrict energy consumption, drilling for oil, things of that nature. Not out of the goodness of their heart, but because they want to constrict the growth of other entities. They know if you control the energy flow and you keep energy expensive, it's harder for competition. This Eastern establishment has a lot of money, and they are threatened by the My Pillow guy generation. They're threatened by the Trumps because the Trumps are not old money. They're relatively new money from like the 1970s through the current day. And they don't have the same idea. If you listen to Trump talk, he'll talk a lot about, we need cheap interest rates. They always want low rates. They always want access to cheap money. They always want the ability to invest and grow. Not necessarily because it's going to benefit you, the average person, but because they need growth because they want to make more money, right? They're the yuppies. The Eastern establishment is like they're the traditional bourgeoisie. They're the traditional power. They don't want to see a tremendous amount of growth. That means competition. They're in favor of more of a quiet end to growth of humanity. They're the ones who love to push abortion and love to push, like I said, the climate change. They're the ones uh, who have no issue with people not getting married, not having kids. The ones who, the world. We have too many people. You've heard this saying over. We have too many people on Earth. Um, we don't have. There's cows farting in the middle of the in the middle of the country. That creates climate change. It's unacceptable. I mean, that's sort of the dichotomy here. You have these two groups, and they both have power, but the Eastern power is truly the one who has the old money. They're the ones who control the banks. They're the ones who control the Western Hemisphere. The the Trump line, the lower level of capital, they have a lot of power, especially relative to regular people, but they are not in control completely. That's why when Trump wanted to make changes at the Fed, couldn't do it. Wanted to inspect Fort Knox, couldn't do it. That's why he can't just end the war in Ukraine. He's had to grind to get that done, and it's not just because of Putin. It's because the people he's trying to end the war with, they don't want to end it. The Eastern establishment wants to destroy Russia, and that's a whole nother topic. But let me point out something that has happened that truly reinforces this entire book that Caleb just wrote. There are 4 instances, and I'm going to show you these right now. Trump wants this all. I saw all of these in the last 48 hours. So Trump wants 4 EU countries to ditch Brussels and side with the U.S. Turns out Trump's not just done with Brussels. He's reportedly ready to pull the plug on the whole thing. A leaked U.S. security doc allegedly says 4 countries should ditch the EU and side with America. So who are the 4 countries? Okay. He wants it's Italy, Hungary, Poland, and Austria. He wants them to sign. Now, why is he choosing these countries? Because they've all expressed frustration with the EU over a couple of things. So Hungary has been the most outspoken against the war in Ukraine. They've said multiple times they don't want to do it. They don't want to spend money. They don't want to send any money. In fact, they even declared they're not sending any money to Ukraine. Italy, Poland, and Austria have also expressed concerns, but they've also fought the EU and Brussels on their immigration policy. So at the same time that the EU pushes these mandates about conversion away from natural gas and oil, and they don't allow them to buy natural gas and oil from the Russians, and they want to destroy Russia and all this stuff, and they keep talking about, the carbon initiatives and all these things, they're also mass importing people from other countries and forcing these countries to take on migrants. Hungary was slapped with a fine recently. I think it was like $100 million, 100 million euro for not accepting any more migrants. Or was that Poland? I might be mixing those up. But this is the kind of tyrannical reign of the European Union. And Ursula von der Leyen, ironically, or whatever her name is, the president of the EU, she made the comment, well, the people choose their leaders, right? And she's obviously not elected by any people. So very ironic in that. But this was sign number one. This is a divide. The old money, this is important to understand. The East, what he calls the Eastern establishment, some people call it the British banking system. Some people call it the Western establishment. It doesn't matter. The people that own the West, they do not want to divide the EU by Central Europe and Italy against the Western European powers. That's going backwards to World War I. They don't want to do that. Why does Trump want to do it? Because his power structure, what Caleb calls the lower level of capital, his power structure is more aligned socially and economically with Italy, Hungary, Austria, and Poland than they are with France and the UK. France and the UK, Trump can say how much he likes Macron and Starmer, but they have nothing in common. Their policies are completely different. And frankly, it's obvious. And if you know Trump, his sons, they watch a lot of social media. They watch a lot of, right-leaning podcasts. And on Pat Bet-David's podcast, they had the EU representative of Poland on last year during Trump's election. He was there. He was at the studio on election night. So there's a kinship with the concept of Poland. Now I know Poland has a lot of Ukrainian people coming over and people with money buying assets there. So that's a whole different conversation. But Poland's politics are more aligned with what Trump said MAGA was going to be than what the United Kingdom or France is. Let's move on to the next thing. This is a big one. Trump wants to scrap the G7 for a new, what he calls a core five, with no seats for Europe. And this would be the USA, China, Russia, India, and Japan. That is astonishing. This is a big deal. The United States, Russia, and China have fought together in a couple of wars. Okay? And Russia has been a loyal supporter of the United States in many wars. They've had proxy wars against the United States, but in the history of Russia, which, you should look up, don't just take my word for it, the Russians sent support to the United States to win the Revolutionary War. The Russians sent support to the Union to win the Civil War. Obviously, the United States paid them back by invading Russia in 1918, along with the other powers, in response to the Soviets winning, which was a travesty. Just awful move by the West, but whatever. Then the Russians and the United States obviously fought together in World War One, World War Two, and even after 9/11, the Russians were very much in favor of the United States getting involved in the war on terror because the Russians had experienced that in Afghanistan, experienced that in the Middle East. That separatists who maybe unbeknownst to some Russian leaders who were backed by the United States had been actors that have disrupted business and progress for the Russians in the Middle East. So they were all in favor of the U.S. getting involved in the war on terror. Of course, it would turn out to be run very differently from what they probably expected. But this is a major shift. This is the largest geopolitical shift, maybe in history, but certainly in the last 200 years. Because this, number one, just any leak like this is not done by accident. This is Trump's team putting this out into the ethos to see, all right, what do people think? What's the reaction? This is not conjecture at all, or this is somebody leaking classified. No. This is not. This is Trump's team putting it out there. And the reason this is such a big shift is you're leaving all of Europe out of the conversation. You're negotiating peace with Russia, economics, and Europe is just being left in the cold. Macron went to China and he licked boot over there for a couple of days and, seemed friendly enough with China. And China's always happy to do business with people. Then when he comes back home, what does he do publicly? He chastises China for having a big trade deficit, the trillion dollar trade deficit with Europe. And then he says this is a crisis moment and Europe must do something about it. Now, how is that the behavior of somebody coming back from a trip from China? Now, this is President Trump saying, I don't even want to talk to you people. I've tried. I know you hate me. And guess what? I don't like you too. Putting this group together just shifts all of the geopolitical power because the United States is NATO. The United States is the reason that the European Union really have any power to begin with. It's because it's backed by NATO and backed by President Trump. And let me make it clear, the UK isn't really out of the Euro sector just because of Brexit. That was nonsense. But this group changes everything. And what Trump is doing by putting this out there is humiliating Europe because he's saying, I'm going to talk to the country that has the trade deficit with you. I'm going to talk to the country you want to go to war with. And I'll bring India and Japan along. Now, here's my concern. I don't know if China and Russia would actually love this or not. I think Russia would need to see peace play out and trade with the U.S. China would need to feel as if the U.S. was not looking to meddle in their affairs. But I think in good faith, and this is actually my personal opinion, I think that Donald Trump, the president, I've said this on this channel before, I think he has admiration for Russia and China. I think he has admiration for President Putin and President Xi. If you look at what he does, the good things that President Trump does in the United States are all things that President Xi and President Putin would do. Shaking hands with North Korea, being friendly with them. He's the first president to visit and shake hands with North Korea since before the war. Going in and talk. Now I know this hasn't played out yet, but talking about infrastructure, buildings, domestic manufacturing, even the concept of more protectionist economic strategy. So not free trade with Mexico and Canada, but putting up tariff walls, not allowing them to take our industries over the border. Now that was all the talk. Obviously, this has not played out. So let me make that clear. This is not an endorsement of MAGA, but this is a commentary on the perception and the philosophy that they told us. Okay, that's all we can do here is react to what they do and say. But all these things are aligned with what Russia and China would do. Not to mention The fact that culturally, even though China's communist, Russia used to be communist, and there's a lot of that communist ethos in the air there. Russia, China, and India has a huge communist party too, but their cultures, Japan too, the culture is conservative. Okay? When you think about India, China, Russia, and Japan, these are not places where I'm thinking there's going to be a heavy emphasis on pride parades. There's not going to be a heavy emphasis on or anti-military parade. These are not the kind of countries where people are going to say it's good to be single at 50. These are not the kind of countries where people will chastise you for having faith, having religion, or having children. Living a more traditional, culturally conservative lifestyle. These countries are in favor of that. It's Western Europe that is at the opposite end of that cultural perspective. If you look at and this point here about China with the 0.7 inflation, unbelievable. That's amazing. China just keeps on winning. Hungary accepts Trump's new strategy. So in reaction to this security strategy, this commentary, Viktor Orban, the U.S. has a precise understanding, of Europe's decline. A civilizational decline that in Hungary we have been fighting for 15 years. At least we are not fighting alone. Now that is Viktor Orban putting it out there to Western Europe. When he says civilizational decline that in Hungary we have been fighting, who is he talking about? He's not just talking about the migrants that are coming into Europe. No. He's talking about Brussels. He's talking about London. He's talking about Paris. He's talking about the leadership. He's talking about Berlin. He's talking about the leadership in the EU who have been kicking around Central Europe and Eastern European countries, forcing them to fight this war, forcing them to take on migrants when they couldn't do it or didn't want to, forcing them to adopt cultural changes in their society that they may not want. That's what he's talking about. And he is throwing it out there very loudly to the President of the United States to say, we are with you. We are not with Western Europe. This is a brutal 48 hours for the leadership in Europe. Brutal. And then, as if it couldn't get any worse, this report. The United States delivers a resounding slap to Europe. In a surprising strategic move, the United States has taken over the entire production of a rare earth mineral mine in Brazil until 2030, cutting off the European Union, which had been negotiating for it for months. The European Commissioner for Industry is shocked. He says, quote, "We were preparing for the visit to sign, but the Americans arrived with the money and bought everything." Wow. So all of this, in 48 hours, the President of the United States declares a core five, a group excluding Europe from a geopolitical, economic, maybe even military alliance. Huge. Maybe instead of having a passport that gets me into crappy Paris or dilapidated London, I can get a passport that'll take me into Beijing or Moscow or Tokyo. Well, I can already go to Tokyo, but hey, make it cheaper. More flights to these countries, so it's cheaper and easier to travel. Less travel to Europe. Then he goes out and this is all related to, by the way, him putting out that peace plan to Ukraine and him negotiating with Putin for peace without Zelensky at the table, without the Germans, without the Western Europeans. And there was a report that the European Union was there. There had been leaked conversations that they had basically said to Zelensky, "Don't trust Trump. He's going to try to cut a deal behind your back. It's going to screw you. We'll give you money. We'll stay in the fight." You don't think Trump is aware that his so-called buddies are not working behind his back to keep the war going? JD Vance is out there just letting it rip. JD Vance is saying to Western Europe what Trump would say if he didn't have to play somewhat nice. Then he goes out, on top of all of that, then he goes out and he has his people take a strategic rare earth mineral mine from the European Union, who they had been working on and negotiating for months, and he steals it from them. Like the shrewd lower level of capital businessman that he is. That right there encompasses what is happening in the ruling class. Okay? How you have these two entities, and Europe is dominated by the old money. It's dominated by the Eastern establishment. It's dominated by the British banking. London City, Brussels, Basel, Switzerland, Wall Street, dominated. But there are people in Wall Street who are members of the second power structure, the lower level of capital. And Mr. Trump, everything he's doing, aligning himself, telling the EU, hey, you know what? There are a couple of states in here that should just join us. Should step away. Italy, Hungary, Austria, Poland, step away. We're about growth. We're going to invest. We want cheap money. Now, none of this is class warfare. None of this is for the proletariat. You might like typical in capitalism, you'll have some people that will benefit from this. But this, I am not saying this gleefully because I believe that this will help all people. But I am saying this gleefully because I believe that his power structure is slightly less detrimental to our health, our safety, and is progressing towards peace much faster than the old traditional power structure, which started all the world wars, the Napoleonic Wars, all of the wars, the Opium Wars, the Civil War. I mean, you name it. All of the problems of history are dominated by a battle with the old establishment. And Trump's power structure, which is not revolutionary, but is different, is at odds with them. And there are things that his power structure can do that we can benefit from without them even intending us to. And one of those things is peace with Russia, more trade with China, better relationship with Russia and China, mean cheaper stuff for us. It doesn't solve all of our problems, but it's better. And you have to take your wins where you can get them while you're building to something better. And this right here, this 24 to 48 hours of news is the most significant shift in American foreign policy since the purchase of America by the private bankers in 1913. This is the most significant shift to our foreign policy because this essentially separates us from Western Europe and aligns us with Russia, China, and secures a relationship with India and Japan. And as a byproduct of that, will make us closer to North Korea, make us closer to Vietnam, will make us closer to Malaysia, to Indonesia, to the Philippines. And maybe will prevent war with Venezuela and keep us closer with our Latin American friends. I hope you can smile and take something positive away from this, because I am. Thank you very much, everybody. Always appreciate it. Please like and subscribe.